My name is David Garcia. I'm an associate professor at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. I spend most of my time research and writing. I do work on school choice. I do work on accountability. I do work on the implementation of education policy, and most recently doing work on how to bring research to policy. I've got some work right now looking at school choice, but the work I'm doing now on school choice is a bit different. Most of the research has looked at when people move to a school of choice, regardless of what the school is. What I've been working on for the past couple years is re-enrollment. In other words, once they're in, do they stay? And do parents stay in patterns that policymakers would like them to, or policymakers think that makes some sense? So in Arizona, for instance, I looked at, we have grades that we give schools and labels we give schools, and wanted to look at whether or not parents re-enroll in schools in differential rates based on those labels. By and large, they don't. 90% of our highest rated schools, the parents come back, and 86% of the parents in our failing schools come back. And that led me to start thinking about why not. And I put a lot of these into market analogies because I believe that that's what really drives the legislative discussion. So my students and I have written about these as repeat customers. And you could think about if the FDA, if Consumer Reports, if everybody came out and said your product was horrible and 86% of your customers returned. One fact is I don't think it would happen in the private sector, but it happens in schools all the time. And one of the analogies I use is you could imagine, if you went to Starbucks or some coffee place, got a horrible cup of coffee, and instead of leaving and never coming back again, which the rational consumer should do, you got behind the counter and helped them make you a better cup of coffee. But that irrational behavior is exactly what we see parents doing all the time in schools. And it's led, at least in Arizona and through the work I'm working on right now, maybe to stop thinking about parents as strictly rational consumers in this whole school choice / markets model. My background's a bit different than others here. I was associate superintendent for the state of Arizona for a couple of years. I worked at our state legislature. I was in charge of our research and analyst committee. I worked at a think tank in Arizona, all before deciding to join faculty at Arizona State University. So one of the experiences I'll always remember is being in the legislature, working with the education committee, and going home and writing my dissertation at night, and realizing that what I was reading and writing had no impact, and people were not talking about it at all in my day job. I still remember getting in front of my first committee. They asked me to do a presentation on kind of the state of Arizona. I used the word triangulation in the first sentence. And a state senator turned to me and said, Dr. Garcia, actually it wasn't Dr. Garcia at the time, David at the time, we don't want you to use those fancy words here. And it threw my whole presentation off because I had fancier words waiting that I just couldn't use. So that experience has always driven what I do, what I write, and how I get involved in the state, how I get involved in issues. And looking also at, we've got this kind of 30,000-foot level with policy, with researchers and folks, and thinking about how those make their way down to schools, to parents, to policymakers. So another piece that recently came out, for instance, is I took the school report cards nationally and tried to make sense of them from a parent's perspective. And it came to me from a parent who literally handed me an Arizona school report card, which was 13 pages long. And said, my school is failing, what do I do? And I realized that in all those 13 pages, there wasn't the right information in there to really answer that question for the parent. So we went through and I analyzed state report cards nationally and tried to get some idea of what was in there and how well, or not so well actually, states were explaining very complicated statistical techniques to parents. And really interesting how horrible some states did at that. In getting that information out. So it's another thing that I work on, and that's part of the implementation side.